Sergeant Marcus Rivera had survived 3 years of interstellar warfare by following one simple rule. When everything goes to hell, focus on what you can control and ignore everything you can't. Right now, what he couldn't control was the fact that his reconnaissance unit had walked straight into a Nexari ambush in the crystalline caverns of Vexthara Prime. What he could control was finding adequate cover behind a formation of luminescent crystal that provided protection, while offering an excellent view of the tactical disaster unfolding around him. Outstanding situational awareness, Rivera, he muttered to himself, checking his weapon's power cell while plasma bolts turned the cavern into a light show that would have been beautiful if it weren't trying to kill him. Walk into an obvious trap, get your squad scattered across half a kilometer of alien real estate, and now you're talking to yourself like a crazy person. Stellar military performance. The Nexari forces had positioned themselves with typical precision, elegant warriors in biomechanical armor that seemed to grow from their bodies rather than being worn over them. Their weapons discharged with musical tones that would have been pleasant in any context other than attempting to disintegrate human soldiers. Marcus had to admit their tactical execution was flawless, even if he was currently on the receiving end of it. What wasn't flawless was the Nexari princess, who had apparently decided to personally lead this particular engagement. Princess Lyrale Vexmora moved through the battlefield with fluid grace that made combat look like an elaborate dance, her ornate armor gleaming with bioluminescent patterns that shifted and flowed with her movements. Her pointed ears swept back elegantly from her head, and even in the chaos of battle, she maintained the perfect posture Marcus associated with aristocracy and formal ceremonies. She was, he had to admit, absolutely magnificent to watch, right up until the moment when a misdirected plasma bolt from one of her own warrior's weapons struck a crystal formation above her position. The explosion sent razor-sharp crystalline fragments raining down like deadly confetti, and one piece, larger than the others and moving with considerably more kinetic energy, caught the princess directly in her left leg. Her biomechanical armor, designed to deflect energy weapons and absorb impact trauma, proved inadequate against a jagged crystal spear that punched straight through the sophisticated materials. Princess Lyrale's scream of agony echoed through the cavern with such pure, desperate pain that it cut through the sounds of battle like a blade through silk. She collapsed, her elegant poise shattered as purple blood began pooling beneath her leg, luminescent in the cavern's strange lighting. Marcus watched in fascination and growing horror as the Nexari warriors immediately ceased their attack and turned toward their fallen princess. But instead of rushing to provide medical assistance, they maintained careful distances, forming a protective perimeter while making no move to actually help the woman who was clearly bleeding to death in front of them. "What the hell are you doing?" Marcus called out, his military medic training warring with his tactical sense. "She's hemorrhaging." The nearest Nexari warrior, an imposing figure whose armor suggested high rank, replied in accented English. "Royal protocol requires formal authorization before physical contact with the princess's sacred form. Medical intervention permissions are being requested through proper channels." Marcus stared at him. "Proper channels? She's bleeding out." "The sacred nature of royal flesh demands appropriate ceremonial preparation before medical contact can be initiated," another warrior explained, as if this were the most reasonable thing in the universe. "Such procedures ensure spiritual and genetic purity during healing processes." "Spiritual and genetic purity," Marcus repeated slowly, watching as the princess writhed in agony while her guards stood around discussing bureaucracy. "You're going to let her die because you need to fill out forms first. The forms ensure that you'll have proper documentation for your princess's funeral," Marcus snapped, his patience evaporating. "How long does this authorization process take?" "Standard royal medical intervention protocols require approximately 47 minutes for complete approval chains, assuming no bureaucratic delays. Marcus looked at Princess Lyreley, noting her increasingly pale skin and the way her movements were becoming more sluggish as blood loss took its toll. She doesn't have 47 minutes. She's got maybe 10 minutes before shock sets in, maybe 20 before blood loss becomes irreversible. Human medical assessments may not apply to Nexari physiology, the ranking warrior replied with infuriating calm. Blood loss is blood loss, Marcus said grimly. Physics works the same way for everybody. Princess Lyreley's voice, weak but carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, cut through their discussion. The protocols must be observed. Sacred law cannot be violated for. She couldn't finish the sentence, her breathing becoming more labored as her body fought to maintain consciousness despite the trauma and blood loss. Marcus watched her struggle to maintain royal dignity while literally dying from adherence to cultural protocol. The absurdity of the situation struck him with crystalline clarity. Here was someone so bound by social expectations that she would rather die than allow someone to touch her without proper paperwork. "This is insane," he announced to no one in particular. "You people have created a system where helping someone in a medical emergency requires government approval. That's not civilization. That's bureaucracy with delusions of grandeur." The princess's guards continued their protective formation while maintaining their respectful distance, occasionally glancing at their fallen leader but making no move to actually assist her. Marcus could see her condition deteriorating with each passing moment, her luminescent blood continuing to flow while her breathing became increasingly shallow. "The authorization request has been submitted to the Royal Medical Council," one of the warriors reported. "Estimated processing time remains within standard parameters." Standard parameters for what? Watching royalty bleed to death in slow motion, Marcus shook his head in disbelief. "This is the dumbest thing I've witnessed in 3 years of military service, and I once watched a guy try to fix a fusion reactor with a hammer." Princess Lyreley's eyes found his across the cavern, and Marcus saw something in her gaze that transcended species boundaries and cultural differences. Desperate hope mixed with resignation, the look of someone who understood she was dying but felt powerless to change the circumstances. "Please," she whispered, the word barely audible. "The pain." Her guards heard her plea but remained motionless, bound by protocols that valued procedure over preservation of life. Marcus realized with growing horror that he was watching someone die not from enemy action or tactical failure, but from the rigid adherence to social customs that prevented basic human compassion. 47 minutes for authorization, he said, more to himself than to anyone else. "Unbelievable. Your entire culture is going to let a princess die because proper medical help requires scheduling an appointment." The princess's breathing grew more ragged, her elegant features contorted with pain, and the growing realization that her own social system might kill her before enemy weapons had the chance. Marcus Rivera, sergeant in the Terran Colonial Marines, veteran of 3 years of interstellar combat, trained medic with experience in battlefield trauma, made a decision that would violate every protocol, custom, and law of Nexari society. It was time to break some rules. The standoff in the crystalline cavern had evolved into something Marcus could only describe as the galaxy's most polite medical emergency. Princess Lyreley continued bleeding luminescent purple blood, while her elite guards maintained their protective formation at precisely calculated distances, close enough to defend against threats, far enough to avoid violating sacred protocols about royal touchability. Status update on medical authorization. The ranking warrior called out, his voice carrying the calm professionalism of someone discussing routine administrative matters rather than watching his princess die. "Royal Medical Council has acknowledged receipt of emergency intervention request," another guard reported. "Current queue position, 4th in priority sequence. Estimated processing time, 39 minutes assuming standard review procedures. Marcus stared at them in disbelief. Q position. She's not renewing a driver's license, she's hemorrhaging. Royal medical interventions require careful consideration of spiritual implications, genetic purity concerns, and ceremonial preparation requirements. The first guard explained patiently. Improper handling of sacred royal flesh could result in contamination of the royal bloodline. Contamination of the royal bloodline. Marcus watched as Princess Lyrelei attempted to apply pressure to her own wound with trembling hands, her strength visibly failing. The royal bloodline is currently leaking all over your floor. Princess Lyrelei's voice, weaker now but retaining its musical accent, cut through their discussion. The protocols exist for important reasons. Sacred law protects the genetic integrity of the ruling line. Princess, Marcus called out, with all due respect to your sacred laws, genetic integrity doesn't matter much if you're dead. Death before dishonor, she replied, though the words came out strained and unconvincing. Royal dignity must be maintained even, especially during crisis. Marcus found himself caught between admiration and exasperation. Here was someone so committed to social propriety that she would rather die than allow strangers to touch her without appropriate paperwork. Yet he could see the fear in her luminous eyes, and the way she kept glancing hopefully at her guards, waiting for someone to break protocol and help her. How exactly does this royal medical intervention system work? He asked, partly from genuine curiosity and partly to keep her talking while he tried to figure out a solution that wouldn't get him shot by nervous guards. Standard procedure, one of the warriors explained helpfully, requires formal request submission to the Royal Medical Council, genetic compatibility verification for all medical personnel, spiritual purification ceremonies for equipment sterilization, and ceremonial authorization for each specific type of physical contact required. Each specific type of physical contact. Touching the royal leg requires different authorization than touching the royal arm. Contact with royal blood requires additional ceremonial preparation. Any medical procedure involving royal flesh must be performed by genetically verified healers who have undergone appropriate ritual purification. Marcus processed this information while watching Princess Lyrelei's condition deteriorate. So even if authorization comes through, you'd still need to find properly certified medical personnel, put them through religious ceremonies, and get separate permits for each body part that needs treatment. Precisely, the system ensures that royal medical care maintains appropriate spiritual and social standards. The system ensures that your royalty dies from bureaucratic complications, Marcus muttered. This is like watching someone drown, while a committee debates the proper procedure for throwing life preservers. Princess Lyrelei attempted to adjust her position, and gasped as the movement sent fresh waves of agony through her injured leg. The sound made Marcus wince in sympathy, while her guards shifted uncomfortably but remained at their respectful distances. "Princess," Marcus said, "can I ask you a personal question?" "I suppose that would be acceptable," she replied, grateful for any distraction from the pain. "Have you ever been injured before? I mean, really injured where you needed immediate medical attention?" Royal children receive extensive protective protocols. This is my first significant physical trauma. So you've never experienced what humans call emergency medical care. I have observed such procedures during military exercises, but royal participation was always theoretical. Marcus felt a surge of understanding. You've never been in a situation where someone just helped you, without forms, without ceremonies, without asking permission first. Princess Lyrelei considered this, her expression thoughtful despite the pain. No, all assistance provided to royalty follows established protocols for safety and propriety. For safety and propriety, Marcus repeated. Not for speed or effectiveness. Speed and effectiveness are secondary to proper procedure. Marcus looked around the cavern at the perfectly disciplined guards, the princess bleeding on the crystal floor, the elaborate system of protocols that prioritized paperwork over preservation of life. The military tactician in him recognized fundamentally flawed operational structure when he saw one. "Princess, can I share an observation from my military experience?" "I would welcome the distraction." In combat medicine, we have a saying, "The best treatment is the treatment that happens." Doesn't matter if it's perfect, doesn't matter if it's performed by the most qualified person, doesn't matter if all the proper forms get filled out afterward. What matters is stopping the bleeding before the patient dies. Her guards exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with this philosophy that prioritized results over procedure. Human military medicine. "Sounds chaotic," Princess Lyreley said, though Marcus detected curiosity mixed with the criticism. "Human military medicine keeps people alive. Sometimes that requires a little chaos." Marcus gestured toward her increasingly pale form. "Your system prioritizes order over outcomes. Very elegant, very proper, very respectful of tradition. Also very likely to result in dead royalty." "The traditions protect." "The traditions," Marcus interrupted gently, "are about to let you die in a puddle of your own blood because helping you requires scheduling a committee meeting." Princess Lyreley fell silent, and Marcus could see her processing this blunt assessment of her situation. Her breathing was becoming more labored, and the pool of luminescent blood beneath her was expanding despite her weak attempts at pressure application. "Revised time estimate," the ranking guard called out. "Royal Medical Council reports unexpected complications with authorization protocols. Current processing delay. Additional 17 minutes for ceremonial verification procedures." Marcus felt his patience snap like an over-tightened cable. 17 additional minutes. She doesn't have 17 additional seconds. He looked at Princess Lyreley, at the growing desperation in her eyes, at the way her elegant composure was cracking under the weight of pain, and the realization that her own culture's obsession with protocol might kill her before her enemies had the chance. "Princess," he said, "I'm about to ask you something that's going to sound completely insane by your cultural standards. I'm listening. What if someone ignored all the protocols, all the ceremonies, all the sacred laws about touching royalty and just helped you, right now, without authorization, without proper procedures, without any of the bureaucratic nonsense your people seem to think is more important than your life?" She stared at him with wide eyes as if he just suggested something truly revolutionary. "That would be forbidden," she whispered. "Violation of royal sanctity, cultural contamination, possible genetic compromise. But you'd be alive to complain about it afterward." Princess Lyreley looked at her guards, still maintaining their respectful distances while she slowly bled to death, then back at Marcus. For a moment he saw her not as an authorization status. She whispered, her voice barely audible. "Royal Medical Council reports. Procedural complications," her guard replied reluctantly. "Additional authorization required from the Ceremonial Purity Commission. Estimated additional delay, 23 minutes. Princess Lyreley closed her eyes, and Marcus saw the moment when she realized that her own culture's elaborate protective protocols were going to kill her. A single tear traced down her cheek, elegant even in despair. "Well," Marcus announced to the cavern at large, "this is officially the stupidest thing I've ever witnessed, and I once watched a colonel try to negotiate with a malfunctioning AI by offering it a promotion." He rose from his cover, ignoring the immediate response from Nexari weapons trained on him, and began walking toward the injured princess with the purposeful stride of someone who had made an irrevocable decision. "Human soldier, halt," the ranking guard commanded. "Unauthorized approach to royal person is forbidden." "Yeah, well, unauthorized death of royal person seems like a bigger problem," Marcus replied, not breaking stride. unless you people have figured out how to resurrect princesses with the proper paperwork. This violation of sacred law. This violation of sacred law is called emergency medical care, Marcus interrupted, reaching Princess Lyralei's side. Feel free to arrest me after she's not bleeding to death anymore. He dropped to his knees beside her, and the princess's eyes widened in shock as he placed his hands directly on her wounded leg without ceremony, hesitation, or apparent concern for the cultural apocalypse he was creating. The contact sent a jolt through both of them, not just the physical sensation of skin against skin, but the profound violation of every social boundary that defined her existence. Marcus felt the warmth of her blood between his fingers as he located the primary arterial damage, while Princess Lyralae experienced something she had never encountered in her carefully orchestrated life. Someone touching her not because protocol demanded it, not because ceremony required it, but simply because she needed help. What are you doing? She breathed, staring at his hands on her leg. Applying pressure to arterial bleeding, assessing wound depth, checking for foreign objects in the injury site, and trying to keep you from dying while your people debate the proper procedure for saving your life. Marcus replied matter-of-factly, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. Standard battlefield medicine. Nothing fancy, nothing ceremonial, just basic, keep the blood inside the person techniques. The princess's guard stood frozen in a tableau of cultural confusion, unsure whether to shoot Marcus for sacrilege, thank him for saving their princess, or request additional authorization for witnessing unauthorized royal medical treatment. "You're touching royal flesh," Princess Lyralae said, her voice filled with wonder rather than outrage. "Without purification, without ceremony, without permission." "I'm touching an injured person who needs medical attention," Marcus corrected, examining the crystal fragments embedded in her leg. "The royal part is just coincidental. Blood vessels don't care about your social status. They just care about staying intact and keeping you alive." She stared at him with an expression of complete bewilderment. But the contamination, the spiritual implications, the genetic concerns. "Princess, with all due respect to your spiritual implications, the only thing I'm concerned about right now is stopping this bleeding before you go into irreversible shock." Marcus began extracting crystal fragments with careful precision. "We can discuss cultural contamination after I make sure you're going to survive to be culturally contaminated." Princess Lyralae gasped as he removed a particularly large fragment, but the sound carried relief as well as pain. For the first time since her injury, she could feel the bleeding beginning to slow under his steady pressure. "This is forbidden," she whispered, but her tone suggested she was questioning the prohibition rather than stating it as fact. "Lots of useful things are forbidden," Marcus replied, working to fashion a proper pressure bandage from his medical kit. "Doesn't mean they're wrong. Sometimes it just means the people making the rules prioritize tradition over common sense." Common sense. The idea that saving someone's life is more important than following procedures designed by people who never anticipated the specific emergency you're currently experiencing. Marcus secured the bandage, noting with satisfaction that the bleeding had stopped. "Your wound is stabilized, by the way. You're going to live." The profound simplicity of that statement, "you're going to live," hit Princess Lyralae like a revelation. Someone had acted without authorization or ceremony purely because her survival mattered to them. "Why?" she asked, meeting his eyes directly for the first time. "Why risk cultural violation, diplomatic incident, possible execution for touching forbidden royal flesh?" Marcus paused in his medical procedures, considering the question seriously. "Because watching someone die when you have the ability to help them violates something more fundamental than cultural protocol. It violates basic decency." Basic decency. The idea that every person, royal, common, alien, human, whatever, deserves to have someone care whether they live or die. Not because of their social status, not because of political implications, not because of proper procedures. Marcus resumed his examination of her injuries, just because they're a person who needs help. Princess Lyreley processed this concept, her mind struggling to incorporate the idea that someone could value her life independent of her royal status, her political importance, or her ceremonial significance. Among my people, she said slowly, such immediate care, such intimate contact, such disregard for social boundaries, it would indicate the deepest possible personal bond, family connection, life partnership, sacred commitment. Marcus looked up from bandaging her leg. Among my people, it indicates that you're a medic and someone needs medical attention. Nothing deeper required. Nothing deeper. Sometimes helping people is just helping people. No ulterior motives, no ceremonial significance, no political calculations. Marcus checked her pulse, noting with relief that her color was improving. Sometimes someone just needs help, and you're in a position to provide it, so you do. The princess stared at him with something approaching awe. You treat strangers as if they were family. I treat injured people as if they were injured people. The stranger part is secondary to the needs medical attention part. Marcus smiled. Though I have to admit, this is my first experience with royal emergency medicine. Usually my patients don't require government authorization for basic first aid. Despite her pain and the cultural upheaval occurring around them, Princess Lyreley found herself smiling back. Usually, my medical care doesn't involve someone ignoring every sacred law of my civilization. First time for everything, Marcus said cheerfully. How does your leg feel now? She tested her range of motion carefully, surprised to find that the agony had diminished to manageable pain. Better, much better. The bleeding has stopped, the sharp pain is gone. She looked at him with growing wonder. You saved my life. I applied basic emergency medical care to prevent you from bleeding to death. Not exactly heroic, just practical. But you violated every protocol, every tradition, every sacred law of my people to do it. Yeah, well, Marcus said, beginning to clean up his medical supplies. Sometimes traditions need updating, especially when following them literally kills people. Princess Lyreley looked around the cavern at her guards, still frozen in their protective formation, still awaiting authorization that might never come, still prioritizing procedure over the life of the person they were sworn to protect. Then she looked at Marcus, who had simply acted because action was needed. What happens now? She asked. Now you heal, your people figure out how to process what just happened, and hopefully everybody learns something useful about the difference between protecting traditions and letting traditions kill people. Marcus stood, offering her his hand. Think you can walk with some support? She stared at his outstretched hand. Another violation of protocol, another breach of sacred boundaries, another simple gesture of help offered without ceremony or complication. Princess Lyreley reached out and took his hand. Yes, she said, her voice stronger now, filled with new understanding. I think I can. The aftermath of Marcus's emergency medical intervention created what could only be described as a cultural crisis, with significant diplomatic ramifications, and absolutely no precedent in Nexari legal or social history. Princess Lyreley sat propped against a crystalline formation, her leg properly bandaged, and the immediate threat to her life eliminated, while her guards engaged in heated discussions about protocol violations, unauthorized medical contact, and the general impossibility of their current situation. Legal consultation confirms that no existing statutes address unauthorized alien medical intervention involving royal persons, the ranking guard reported, his voice carrying the bewildered tone of someone whose entire professional framework had just been rendered obsolete. The Royal Legal Council is uncertain how to proceed. Uncertain how to proceed with what? Marcus asked, checking Princess Lyreley's pulse and noting with satisfaction that her color had returned to normal. She's alive, she's stable, and the bleeding has stopped. From a medical perspective, mission accomplished. The cultural implications of unauthorized contact with sacred royal flesh are less important than the biological implications of authorized death from medical neglect, Marcus interrupted. Though I suppose that's a philosophical debate for people who have time for philosophy instead of emergency medical care. Princess Lyrale listened to this exchange with growing fascination. In her entire life, she had never witnessed someone dismiss cultural authority with such casual confidence, never heard anyone suggest that practical results mattered more than proper procedures. Sergeant Rivera, she said, using his name for the first time, may I ask you something about human social structures? Sure, Princess. Though I should warn you that my expertise in social structures is limited to military hierarchy and the basic principle of don't let people die if you can prevent it. Among your people, when someone requires medical assistance, what authorization process is required? Marcus looked at her with genuine puzzlement. Authorization process. Who must grant permission for medical contact? What ceremonies must be observed? What genetic verification is required for medical personnel? Oh, Marcus understood now. None of that. If someone needs medical help, you help them. End of process. But surely there are protocols for. The protocol is, see injured person, provide medical care, worry about paperwork later if at all. Marcus shrugged. We do have medical licensing and training requirements, but in emergency situations, anyone with medical knowledge is expected to help regardless of official credentials. Princess Lyrale processed this information with the expression of someone discovering that gravity worked differently on other planets. Anyone, without authorization, without ceremonial preparation. Princess, if you saw someone bleeding to death on the side of the road, would you really call a committee meeting before trying to stop the bleeding? I would. I would summon properly authorized medical personnel through appropriate channels. And while you were summoning and channeling, the person would die. But the proper procedures would result in properly documented death instead of improperly executed survival. Marcus sat down beside her, maintaining the casual physical proximity that her guards found deeply disturbing. Which outcome do you think serves society better? She considered this question while observing how naturally he had positioned himself within her personal space, not with the calculated distance of her courtiers or the formal positioning of her guards, but simply as one person sitting near another person who might need continued medical monitoring. Your approach prioritizes individual survival over social order, she said thoughtfully. Your approach prioritizes social order over individual survival, Marcus countered. The question is, which society would you rather live in? One where helping people requires government approval, or one where government approval never gets in the way of helping people? Before Princess Lyrale could respond, the sound of approaching vehicles echoed through the cavern. Her guards immediately snapped to attention, weapons raised, while Marcus remained seated beside her with the relaxed posture of someone who had already accomplished his primary objective. Reinforcements, the ranking guard announced. Both Nexari and human forces approaching. Well, Marcus said to Princess Lyrale, looks like our little cultural exchange program is about to get complicated. What will happen now? Honestly, no idea. I violated about 17 different interspecies diplomatic protocols, probably broke several of your sacred laws, and definitely ignored standard prisoner of war conventions. Marcus checked her bandages one more time. But you're alive, so I'm calling it a successful mission. Princess Lyrale stared at him, this human soldier who had risked everything. Diplomatic incident, cultural violation, possible execution, simply because she needed help and he was capable of providing it. Marcus, she said, using his first name deliberately, what you did today, it changes everything. Changes everything how? It proves that the most important bonds between people aren't created by ceremonies, or authorized by councils, or verified through genetic compatibility testing. Her voice grew stronger, more certain. They're created by someone caring enough to act when action is needed. Marcus smiled. That's a pretty revolutionary philosophy for a princess. Perhaps it's time for some revolution. She looked at her guards, still maintaining their protective formations, still bound by protocols that had nearly killed her. I've spent my entire life surrounded by people who were forbidden to touch me, forbidden to help me directly, forbidden to treat me as anything other than a sacred object to be protected and preserved. And now I've experienced what it feels like to be treated as a person worth saving, regardless of protocol or procedure or political implications. Princess Lyrelei struggled to her feet, accepting Marcus's steadying hand without hesitation. It's addictive. The sound of vehicles grew closer, and both human and Nexari forces could be seen approaching through the crystalline corridors. Princess, her ranking guard said urgently, you must distance yourself from the human soldier before reinforcements arrive. The cultural contamination implications. The cultural contamination implications, Princess Lyrelei interrupted, her voice carrying new authority, are exactly what my people need to examine. She remained beside Marcus, her hand still in his. This human soldier demonstrated more genuine care for my well-being in 10 minutes than our entire medical protocol system managed in nearly an hour. But Princess, the sacred laws, she said firmly, nearly killed me today. Perhaps it's time to consider whether laws that prevent people from helping each other serve any useful purpose. Marcus watched this exchange with growing admiration. Princess, are you suggesting that your people might benefit from adopting some human approaches to emergency medical care? I'm suggesting that my people might benefit from adopting some human approaches to caring about each other, period. She turned to face him directly. What you did today, treating me as a person rather than a symbol, prioritizing my survival over social conventions, acting immediately because action was needed, that represents something my culture has lost. What's that? Compassion without conditions, help without authorization, human connection without ceremonial approval. Princess Lyrelei's expression grew determined. When those reinforcements arrive, when the diplomatic crisis begins, when both our governments start analyzing the political implications of what happened here, I want them to understand something. What do you want them to understand? That the enemy soldier who saved my life showed more loyalty to Nexari royal welfare than our own protective protocols did. She squeezed his hand gently. That sometimes the most important bridges between species are built by individuals who care more about doing what's right than doing what's authorized. The first vehicles reached the cavern entrance, and the sounds of organized military deployment filled the space. Marcus and Princess Lyrelei could hear shouted commands in both human and Nexari languages, the rapid organization of defensive positions, and the urgent communications of forces trying to understand an unprecedented situation. Last chance to distance yourself from the diplomatic incident that's about to walk through that entrance, Marcus said softly. Princess Lyrelei looked at the approaching forces, then at Marcus, then at her own guards who had been prepared to let her die rather than violate protocol. Marcus Rivera, she said clearly, her voice carrying across the cavern for everyone to hear. You saved my life today by treating me as a person worth saving rather than a problem requiring authorization to solve. Whatever diplomatic complications arise from your actions, I want it clearly understood that you acted with honor, compassion, and courage. Princess, furthermore, she continued, raising her voice as human and Nexari forces entered the cavern, I formally recommend that both our species examine whether our current approaches to interspecies cooperation might benefit from adopting the practical compassion this human soldier demonstrated today. The cavern filled with soldiers, diplomats, medical personnel, and various officials whose job it would be to untangle the cultural and political implications of the day's events. But Princess Lyreley remained beside Marcus, her hand still in his, making a statement that transcended military conflict and diplomatic protocol. "Think this will cause problems?" Marcus asked quietly. "Undoubtedly," Princess Lyreley replied with a smile that suggested she was looking forward to causing exactly these kinds of problems. The best kind of problems, the kind that force people to question whether their traditions serve their values or prevent them. As the two groups of reinforcements established their respective positions and began the complex process of negotiating an unprecedented situation, Marcus realized that his simple act of emergency medical care had become something much larger, a demonstration that connection between species could transcend the barriers their governments erected. "Princess," he said, "I think you and I just accidentally started a revolution." "Not accidentally," she replied, watching as diplomats and military commanders tried to process the sight of an alien princess, publicly supporting a human soldier who had violated every sacred law of her culture. "I think we started it exactly when and how it needed to be started, with one person choosing to help another person, regardless of the rules that said such help